At Christmas, my son-in-law labeled me a foolish elderly gentleman, ridiculing my grasp of historical events with boisterous chuckles. The space grew quiet as one attendee, his gaze widened in surprise, addressed me as professor and extended his hand in greeting. My son-in-law's arrogant smirk faded away and his entire reality crumbled. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to the channel and share in the comments the current time and your location. Listen, old-timer. I'm positive Gettysburg happened in '64. Trevor's words sliced through the cozy atmosphere of my study like a knife through fine fabric. I placed my coffee cup down with intentional precision, the pottery clinking softly against the wooden end table. My worn leather seat groaned as I sat up straighter. 4 decades of scholarly poise remained intact, even as my heart fluttered uneasily. Actually, Trevor, it occurred from July 1st to 3rd in 1863. The response emerged steady, academic, composed. Trevor's cheeks turned crimson over his pricey knit pullover. He smacked his hand against my fireplace ledge, causing the framed family pictures to jolt. That's it. You're nothing but an aged idiot who muddles up details. The flames popped in the abrupt hush. Emily fidgeted on the couch positioned between us, her fingers ringing together anxiously. Trevor, please. I've dedicated 40 years to this subject, I replied softly, clutching the cup's handle. The china seemed delicate, much like the fragility of the situation. Yeah, well. Trevor spun around, his high-end loafers squealing on my polished wooden planks. Perhaps it's time you gave it up. That program I saw definitely stated 64. You're slipping, Martin. Emily rose suddenly. That's sufficient. Her tone echoed the sharpness from her adolescent days. Dad's an expert on this. Oh, wonderful. Trevor flung his arms upward. Now you're siding against your spouse. I'm not picking sides. I'm presenting truths. Emily headed for the coat storage, her steps brisk and irritated. Dad instructed on Civil War topics for years. Trevor's chuckle lacked any warmth. Instructed? That's in the past, Emily. Past for good cause. The phrases struck me like actual strikes. I observed my son-in-law snatch his dark overcoat from the storage, his actions brisk with self-righteous fury. Emily trailed behind, her complexion ashen yet resolute. Trevor, we're departing, she declared, avoiding my gaze. Happily. He pulled on his coat with forceful speed. I won't stay and hear muddled nonsense from a guy who can't recall fundamental history. Emily at last met my eyes. Her emerald gaze, identical to my departed wife's, conveyed regret and irritation in balanced measure. Dad, it's okay, dear. The falsehood slipped out effortlessly, a habit of shielding her taking hold. Travel carefully. Trevor had reached the entrance already, his fingers on the metal handle. Let's go, Em. Somewhere with folks grounded in the real world. Emily paused for a single beat, then exited after him. The door shut with a gentle snap that reverberated through my now vacant home. I stayed seated, hearing Trevor's luxury sedan engine rev up in the drive. From the window, I saw their front beams arc over my frost-covered grass as they reversed. The crimson rear lights vanished along Maple Avenue, abandoning me with the fading embers and the term fool echoing in my thoughts. Rising gradually, my joints creaking in protest, I approached the pane. The road appeared serene beneath the wintry flakes, neighboring homes radiating inviting golden glows, ordinary households enjoying typical evening meals. I laid my hand on the chilly glass and observed until their lights fully dissolved into the Portland evening. The entryway shut with a decisiveness that seeped into my core. I lingered there briefly, my palm still on the metal handle, attuned to the quiet that flooded my residence like liquid pouring into a damaged vessel. Fool. The label resounded in my thoughts, ricocheting off the barriers of my awareness. 4 decades of instruction, and this young man claims I lack basic knowledge. I strolled leisurely back to my study, beyond the family snapshots that had observed our clash. Emily's marriage images beamed at me from the ledge, her joyful expression beside Trevor's assured smile. How altered that smile appeared this evening, distorted by disdain and assurance. My vast collection of books loomed ahead, countless tomes organized with the exactness of years. I knew precisely where to locate what I sought. My digits glided over the faded covers until they touched the well-known crimson binding. Encyclopedia of U.S. History, Volume 7. The tome parted in my grasp like a trusted companion. I'd consulted these sections innumerable times, steering youthful intellects through the intricacies of the nation's most lethal struggle. The Gettysburg section materialized beneath my touch effortlessly, The Battle of Gettysburg I voiced to my deserted study, July 1st through 3rd, 1863. I positioned the book on my desk and grabbed my notebook, a routine from years of class planning. My ink pen scraped over the sheet. Gettysburg, July 1, 3, 1863. Union triumph. Pivotal moment in the Civil War. The notes gazed back, tidy and accurate. I knew them intimately, had delivered them to multitudes of pupils across 4 decades. Each detail etched in my recollection like inscriptions on a memorial. I retrieved another book, then more. The Civil War Reference Guide, Conflicts and Commanders, U.S. Military Chronicles. Every resource affirmed what I held as fact. The aroma of antique volumes enveloped me. Hide bindings, vintage pages, the subtle dustiness of gathered wisdom. This study embodied my life's endeavor, my enthusiasm, my mastery. These texts had served as my partners in retirement, my comfort following Margaret's passing, my link to the realm of concepts that had forever nourished me. 4 decades instructing on the Civil War, directing young thinkers through the nuances of America's deadliest clash, and my son-in-law rejected me as a befuddled senior. I glanced at my credentials displayed on the distant wall. Undergraduate from Oregon State, graduate from University of Washington, doctorate from Stanford, 40 years at Portland Community College. 3 articles published on Civil War strategies. Former students who still mailed holiday greetings appreciating how I'd sparked their passion for history. All irrelevant to Trevor, evidently. I eyed the family snapshot on my workstation. Emily at her secondary school commencement, beaming in her mortarboard and robe. She'd always been sharp, inquisitive, posing queries that pushed me to delve further. When did she cease championing scholarly discipline? When did she opt for harmony over accuracy? The encyclopedia remained open in front of me. I followed the passage with my digit, each term a minor justification. But justification for who? The vacant residence provided no viewers for my correctness. Shutting the tome softly, I turned to the family image once more. Emily's youthful visage stared back, brimming with potential and opportunity. That young woman would have rebutted Trevor instantly, would have championed evidence over emotions. What had become of her? I returned the encyclopedia to its exact position on the rack. The inquiry lingered in the atmosphere like haze from the waning flames, unresolved and disconcerting. 5 days until Christmas, 5 days to determine the sort of individual I aspired to become. The week progressed at a leisurely pace. I cared for my cold season plants, delved into reading, and revisited that night repeatedly. Every dawn delivered the identical pattern, brew, periodical, the serene cadence of a pensioner's existence. Yet beneath the routine, a change had occurred. The label fool had embedded itself profoundly, generating a persistent discomfort. Friday dawned overcast and chilly. I positioned myself at my kitchen pane, observing flakes powder the naked limbs of my oak. Then the telephone sounded. Dad? Emily's tone bore that artificial brightness I'd come to identify, the inflection she employed when attempting to ease tensions. Hello, dear. I set aside my coffee vessel and focused entirely on her. I wanted to discuss Christmas. She hesitated, and I sensed her selecting phrases meticulously. Would you join us for the meal? We're hosting a small group. Trevor's folks, some locals, a few of his co-workers from the company. The offer caught me off guard. Following Sunday's dispute, I'd presumed the holiday would be a modest, uncomfortable event. Certainly. Is Trevor okay with it? Another hesitation. It'll all work out, Dad, I assure you. I moved to the kitchen pane, device against my ear, and peered at my snow-blanketed yard. The measured impartiality in Emily's speech revealed everything. Trevor was unaware of this outreach, or if aware, he wasn't pleased. What hour should I show up? Around 6, just kin and acquaintances. Nothing elaborate. Her ease was evident now that I'd agreed. I'm preparing that crown roast you adore. Sounds delightful. I grabbed the schedule on my fridge, noting December 25th with my writing tool. The entry appeared bold amid the largely blank period. Anything to contribute? Just your presence, Dad, that's plenty. As I absorbed my daughter's cautious proposal, I understood this holiday assembly could offer an ideal chance to confront the persistent strain that had blanketed us like seasonal ice. The reference to co-workers triggered a recollection. Trevor was employed at Morrison & Associates, a renowned advisory group. Intriguing. Emily, I murmured softly regarding Sunday. It's behind us, Dad. Distant past. The reply arrived too swiftly, too vibrant. See you on Christmas. All right. Distant past, I echoed post-call. The expression stuck in my thoughts as I resumed my brew and periodical. Distant past. Precisely what Trevor alleged I was ignorant of. I turned the publication to the regional updates, perusing the standard format. Death notices, local happenings, corporate updates. My attention halted on a brief piece. Morrison Associates marks prosperous year. The write-up noted the group's expansion, their growing clientele, their standing for superiority. Trevor's employer, Trevor's associates, would attend the holiday meal. I placed the publication down and examined my schedule anew. December 25th encircled in azure. 5 days to ready myself. 5 days to contemplate what sort of holiday present a parent could offer his daughter's husband. The dawn illumination altered through my pain, projecting elongated shades over the kitchen tiles. Outdoors, the flakes persisted, draping all in immaculate white new beginnings, blank canvases. I grinned for the initial occasion since Sunday. The days off transpired serenely. I perused, maintained my plants, and discovered myself pondering the holiday meal more than typical. By Tuesday dawn, Christmas Eve had come with that unique gravity of significant occasions. This day felt distinct. I stood at my sleeping chamber pane, viewing flakes float beyond the stripped oak limbs, and finalized my choice. If I intended to confront Trevor's ongoing rejection, I'd handle it correctly. The dark blue ensemble in my wardrobe, the one donned for Stockholm during Professor Anderson's Nobel Prize in History, felt fitting for the event. Attiring myself had long been a ceremony. 4 decades of presentations had shown me that presentation counted, that esteem frequently started with one's appearance. I neatened my facial hair meticulously, buffed my ebony leather footwear until they shone, and fine-tuned my neckwear with the accuracy of one readying for a key address. The dining surface turned into my preparation zone, craft paper laid out, golden trim coiled next to cutters, and Emily's present awaited packaging. I'd selected thoughtfully a life story of Eleanor Roosevelt she'd referenced desiring months prior. She likely assumed I'd overlooked, but educators never disregard a learner's curiosities. The vintage posed greater difficulty. I'd devoted an hour at Morrison's Market the day before, examining tags and inquiring. Ultimately chose a Burgundy from a winery Margaret and I toured on our milestone journey to France. Not overly costly to appear ostentatious, but fine enough to show I appreciated excellence. My hands proceeded systematically through the enclosing task, folding borders with scholarly exactitude. Each crease required perfection, each angle crisp. The biography vanished under refined craft, converted into something befitting the event. The morning periodical rested folded by my coffee container, front pages declaring Christmas Eve activities across Portland. Religious ceremonies, aid campaigns, kin reunions, everyday folks engaging in everyday pursuits. I pondered how many readied themselves to enter scenarios where their fundamental skills would be doubted. Bells tolled afar, St. Mary's signaling 9. I possessed 9 hours until Emily anticipated me. 9 hours to uphold the deliberate serenity I'd nurtured since Friday's communication. Positioning before my corridor reflector, I tweaked my neckwear once more. The image reflected steady silver eyes. A gentleman who'd devoted 4 decades educating youthful intellects to analyze critically, to challenge presumptions, to prioritize proof over views. That gentleman merited regard irrespective of Trevor Collins' opinions on befuddled aged idiots. My overcoat dangled prepared near the entry. Hide mittens stowed in the compartments, vehicle keys on the modest stand where I'd set them the prior evening. All arranged, all orderly. As I collected my offerings and proceeded to the carport, I considered if this Christmas Eve would signify a fresh segment in our kin's tale, or merely append another stratum to an already intricate bond. The query floated in the chilly breeze like my evident exhalation, unaddressed yet oddly optimistic. The motor started fluidly, heating in the December chill as I placed Emily's packaged offering and the wine container on the adjacent seat. 20 minutes through Portland to their residence in the Laurelhurst area. 20 minutes to brace for whatever the night could deliver. I reversed from my drive and headed toward Emily's road, departing my tranquil abode. The journey amid Portland's festively illuminated districts afforded time to watch and ready. Emily's avenues glittered with holiday adornments, each dwelling striving to surpass its peers with illuminations and yard setups. Their drive already accommodated 4 additional cars, a BMW, a Lexus, a Subaru, and a sensible Honda likely owned by locals. I stationed behind the Honda and assembled my offerings from the adjacent seat. Through the broad front panes, I spotted shifting silhouettes, heard the far-off hum of dialogue and mirth. A thriving Christmas Eve assembly well underway. The bell's ring summoned Emily promptly to the doorway, as though she'd been monitoring for my coming. Her grin appeared authentic, yet held that hint of anxious vigor I'd grown to identify. "Dad, you appear so refined." She pecked my cheek, then retreated to appreciate my dark blue attire. "Quite the academic." "Thank you, dear." I presented her the wrapped biography, something I believed you'd appreciate. Trailing her through the foyer, I bore the wine and assessed the setting forward. Their lounge had been converted into a festive display, 10-foot evergreen adorned with pale illuminations, wreaths bordering the hearth, scarlet and golden accents generating warmth against ivory walls. 8 or 9 visitors grouped in relaxed discussion clusters, goblets reflecting the dancing hearth glow. Then Trevor's words pierced the background murmur like a knife through fine fabric. "Oh ho ho! And here's our befuddled old-timer, the one who jumbles his timelines." Every exchange halted. All gazes shifted to me as I positioned in the entry arch, still grasping the burgundy bottle. The chuckles that ensued Trevor's remark flowed through the assembly like ripples on a stream. Each participant unsure if this was warm kin jest or something keener. Trevor positioned by the hearth, evidently the night's narrator, encircled by 3 youthful pairs who'd been captivated by his tales. His confident grin suggested he'd been entertaining them with family anecdotes, building to this moment of my arrival. "Everyone meet Martin, Emily's father," he continued, gesturing toward me with theatrical flourish. "He thinks Gettysburg happened in 1863, can you believe that?" More laughter. Though some guests looked uncomfortable with the public nature of this family ribbing, I maintained my composure, summoning 4 decades of classroom management experience. "Lovely to see everyone here," I said calmly, setting the wine on Emily's side table. Emily moved quickly to my side. "Dad, let me introduce you to the Hendersons from next door. And these are Trevor's colleagues from Morrison." No, Em," Trevor interrupted, clearly enjoying his audience. "Let me tell them about Sunday's argument first. This is educational." An older gentleman near the bookshelf looked up from examining Emily's collection, his expression growing thoughtful as he studied my face. Something about his academic bearing suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with Trevor's performance either. The History Channel documentary was crystal clear. Trevor continued warming to his theme, Gettysburg, 1864. But Professor Emeritus here insists on living in the past with outdated information. The guest's laughter felt more forced now, social politeness overriding genuine amusement. Emily's face had gone pale, her hands twisted into small fists at her sides. I accepted a glass of wine from someone's offered tray and smiled politely at the assembled company. "Thank you for including me in your celebration." But my eyes had found the distinguished gentleman by the bookshelf, who was now watching me with growing recognition in his intelligent features. 15 minutes of polite conversation had passed since Trevor's introduction, and I'd managed to navigate the social minefield with practiced academic grace. The Hendersons proved delightful neighbors, full of stories about their recent trip to Scotland. Trevor's colleagues from Morrison seemed intelligent enough, though they clearly deferred to their host's narrative about family dynamics. I gravitated toward Emily's bookshelf, seeking momentary refuge in the familiar comfort of examining another person's literary choices. Her collection revealed careful thought, historical biographies alongside contemporary fiction, philosophy texts nestled between travel guides. My daughter had inherited good taste in books, at least, Professor Banks. The voice carried such enthusiasm that I turned immediately, wineglass pausing halfway to my lips. A distinguished gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to academic environments. "I'm sorry, do we?" I began, though something about his bearing suggested familiarity. "Henry Wilson. We worked together at Yale." His face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I taught economics while you were revolutionizing the history department." Recognition dawned like sunrise. "Henry, my goodness, it's been at least 15 years since the faculty retreat in Vermont." He clasped my hand warmly. "You look exactly the same, though I suspect you're enjoying retirement more than those endless committee meetings." Our conversation began to draw subtle attention from nearby guests. The Hendersons paused their own discussion to listen. Even one of Trevor's colleagues glanced our way, curiosity evident in her expression. "Yale, was it?" Mrs. Henderson asked politely. "How wonderful that you two found each other again." Henry's enthusiasm bubbled over. "Found each other, Margaret." This man was a legend on campus. Students would camp outside his office during registration, hoping to get into his Civil War seminars. My cheeks warmed at the praise, though I noticed Emily watching nervously from across the room. She'd positioned herself where she could monitor both our conversation and Trevor's ongoing performance near the fireplace. "Henry exaggerates," I said modestly. "I simply tried to make history relevant to young minds." "Revant?" Henry laughed, turning to address our growing audience. This modest man published the definitive analysis of Gettysburg strategy that's still cited in military memes worldwide. The word Gettysburg seemed to echo through the room like a bell. Conversation near the fireplace faltered slightly as Trevor's sharp ears caught the reference. His storytelling voice grew louder, competing for attention. Henry continued, oblivious to the family dynamics he was walking into. "I remember that faculty dinner when Harvard tried to poach you. The entire history department practically formed a human chain around your office." More guests had begun to drift toward our corner of the room, drawn by Henry's animated reminiscences. The bookshelf provided a natural gathering point, and my old colleague's storytelling was proving more engaging than appetizers and small talk. "What was your specialty exactly, Professor Banks?" asked one of Trevor's colleagues, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s. Before I could answer, Henry jumped in with professional pride. "Civil War history, particularly battle tactics and political implications." Martin could recite troop movements at Gettysburg from memory down to the hour. Trevor's voice from across the room grew more insistent, but I noticed several of his audience members glancing our way with obvious interest. The evening's social dynamics were shifting in ways that none of us had anticipated. Emily appeared at my elbow with suspicious timing, carrying a fresh bottle of wine. "Dad, would you help me in the kitchen for a moment?" But Henry was just warming up, and our growing audience seemed genuinely intrigued by these unexpected revelations about the quiet man Trevor had introduced as confused about basic facts. Henry's enthusiasm bubbled over like wine from an overfilled glass. Our small gathering had grown to include the Hendersons, two of Trevor's colleagues, and several other guests who'd abandoned their conversations to eavesdrop on academic reminiscences. 35 years Martin taught at Yale, Henry announced to our expanding audience. Brilliant lecturer. Students would camp outside his office hoping for a spot in his seminars. Mrs. Henderson leaned closer, her earlier politeness replaced by genuine interest. "What was your field exactly, Professor Banks?" Before I could deflect with my usual modesty, Henry jumped in with professorial zeal. "Civil War history primarily." But Martin's real genius was connecting historical patterns to economic theory, interdisciplinary work before it became fashionable. I noticed Emily hovering near the kitchen doorway, her face pale as she watched the conversation unfold. She had positioned herself where she could monitor both our group and Trevor's ongoing performance near the fireplace. His research on the economic consequences of historical events was revolutionary. Henry continued warming to his subject. "That's what earned him the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1998. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Complete silence descended on our corner of the living room. Even the background conversation seemed to pause as if the very air had shifted. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. The Hendersons exchanged startled glances. "Did you say Nobel Prize?" whispered one of Trevor's colleagues, a sharp-eyed woman who'd introduced herself as Sarah from the firm. Henry beamed with professional pride. Indeed, the committee recognized his groundbreaking analysis of how major historical conflicts reshape economic systems. His paper on Civil War monetary policy influenced Federal Reserve practices for decades. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or vindication I couldn't tell. "Henry, you're too kind. It was collaborative work." "Nonsense." He turned to address the growing circle of listeners. "This modest man revolutionized how we understand the intersection of history and economics. Harvard tried to steal him away twice. Princeton made offers that would make your head spin." The room's acoustic had completely changed. Trevor's voice still carried from the fireplace, but his audience was drifting away, drawn by the magnetic pull of unexpected revelation. Even the Christmas music seemed muted against Henry's enthusiastic testimony. "I remember the faculty celebration when the Nobel Committee called. Henry continued his academic instincts, fully engaged. The entire history department gathered in the faculty lounge. We'd always known Martin was special, but international recognition. It felt like vindication for all of us. Sarah, the colleague from Morrison, stepped closer. "Professor Banks, I have to ask, do you still publish? Research current economic patterns." "Retirement has its pleasures," I said carefully, aware that Emily was now moving through the crowd toward us, her expression mixing relief with growing anxiety. Henry caught my diplomatic tone and laughed. Still humble after all these years. "Martin, you must tell them about the Smithsonian lecture series you consulted on." But his words were competing with a different sound now, footsteps approaching from across the room, heavy, purposeful steps that carried the weight of someone whose attention had finally been captured by phrases like Nobel Prize and Professor floating above the general conversation. Trevor had noticed the unusual quiet, the gravitational shift of his party guests toward our corner of the room. "Wait, what's all this about a Nobel Prize?" Trevor's voice cut through our gathering like a knife through birthday cake. He pushed through the small crowd, with the aggressive confidence of a host reclaiming control of his own party. Henry turned with academic enthusiasm, clearly delighted to share his colleagues' achievements with new audiences. "I was just telling everyone about Martin's distinguished career at Yale University." "Distinguished?" Trevor's laugh carried no humor. "This is all nonsense. He doesn't even know basic historical facts." The room's energy shifted again, this time toward discomfort. Guests stepped back slightly, sensing family drama about to explode in their carefully civilized Christmas gathering. "Trevor." Emily's voice carried warning, but her husband was beyond hearing subtle cues. "He claimed Gettysburg was in 1863. Trevor continued, his volume rising with his desperation. Complete confusion. "I corrected him myself just last week." Henry's expression shifted from enthusiasm to bewilderment. He looked between Trevor and me, trying to process this unexpected hostility toward a respected colleague. "I'm sorry," Henry said carefully, "but Gettysburg was indeed July 1st through 3rd, 1863. That's established historical fact." "No." Trevor's face reened above his expensive sweater. The History Channel documentary was crystal clear. 1864, I know what I watched." The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mrs. Henderson touched her husband's arm, a subtle signal about witnessing family conflict. Sarah from Morrison looked fascinated despite herself, watching the drama unfold with professional interest in human dynamics. I maintained my calm, drawing on decades of managing difficult classroom situations. Perhaps we could simply verify this online. Most smartphones have internet access. The suggestion hung in the air like smoke from the fireplace. Trevor hesitated, his confidence flickering for the first time since his aggressive approach. Emily moved closer to her husband, her face tight with apprehension. "Fine." Trevor pulled his phone from his pocket with theatrical determination. "Let's settle this once and for all. Everyone can see how confused old academics get their facts mixed up." Henry watched this exchange with growing comprehension of the family dynamics he'd innocently disrupted. His earlier enthusiasm had cooled to concerned observation. "Trevor, please," Emily whispered. But her husband was committed to his course now, phone glowing in his hands as the assembled guests waited for objective verification. The Christmas tree lights cast gentle shadows across the tense scene. Holiday decorations provide an incongruous backdrop for a confrontation that would either vindicate 40 years of scholarship or confirm Trevor's narrative of confused old age. "Let's see here," Trevor muttered, typing with aggressive confidence. Battle of Gettysburg date. The room held its collective breath as technology prepared to render judgment on historical truth. Trevor's fingers moved across his phone screen with the confidence of a man, certain he was about to prove his point to a room full of witnesses. The small device glowed in his hands like a judicial beacon, ready to deliver verdict on historical accuracy. "Battle of Gettysburg," he announced to our gathered audience, his voice carrying theatrical authority. "Let's see what actual sources say about dates." The screen loaded with modern efficiency. Trevor's eyes scanned the results, his confident expression beginning its slow transformation into something resembling confusion. "July 1st through 3rd. His voice faltered slightly as he read the search results aloud. 863 silence stretched through the room like taffy. Even the Christmas music seemed to pause in respect for the moment of revelation unfolding before us. "This can't be right," Trevor muttered, his thumb frantically scrolling through multiple search results. Wikipedia, Encyclopedia Britannica, National Park Service. They all say 1863. Henry finished gently, his academic instincts engaged despite the family drama surrounding us. But Trevor wasn't finished. His desperation had shifted into overdrive, fingers flying across the phone screen with increasing frenzy. "Let me check something else," he announced, though his voice had lost its earlier certainty. "This Nobel Prize claimed Martin Banks' Nobel Prize." I watched my son-in-law's face in the blue glow of his phone screen as the search results populated. Each result seemed to drain more color from his features. 1998 Nobel Prize in Economics, he read in barely audible tones. Martin James Banks, Yale University. For groundbreaking analysis of historical economic patterns. The phone trembled slightly in his hands as he continued scrolling through result after result, each one confirming Henry's enthusiastic testimony about my academic career. Reuters News Archive, Nobel Foundation official website, Yale University faculty history. His voice grew smaller with each confirmation. Emily had moved close enough to see the screen over his shoulder, her face a mixture of relief and concern for her husband's very public humiliation. The other guests stood frozen in fascination, witnessing the complete collapse of their host's confident narrative. Sarah from Morrison leaned forward slightly, her professional curiosity evident as she watched Trevor grapple with objective evidence, contradicting everything he'd believed about his father-in-law. "This is impossible," Trevor whispered, staring at the screen as if willing it to change its display. Henry stepped forward with gentle academic authority. "Martin never mentioned his Nobel Prize because he's genuinely modest about his achievements. It's quite characteristic of distinguished scholars." The phone screen continued to glow with irrefutable evidence. Photographs from the Nobel ceremony, academic articles citing my research, Yale University's faculty achievement archives, 40 years of professional accomplishment laid bare before the very people who had witnessed my introduction as a confused old man just minutes earlier. Trevor stood motionless, phone clutched in his hand as reality restructured itself around him in front of his Christmas Eve guests. The silence stretched like taffy, thick and uncomfortable as Trevor stared at his phone screen. The device trembled slightly in his hands, its blue glow illuminating a face that had gone through several shades of realization. "Okay, fine." He looked up from the damning evidence, his voice carrying the desperate edge of a cornered animal. "Maybe you got the dates right about some old battle." I watched him grasp for any remaining thread of superiority, his eyes darting around the room for support that was no longer there. "But you never actually received that prize, did you?" Trevor's voice grew louder, more confident as if he'd found his salvation. "I mean, you didn't go to Stockholm or anything, you're just making that up." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, their wine glasses forgotten in their hands as they witnessed this final desperate attack. "The ceremony was in Stockholm in December 1998, I said calmly, my voice carrying the same measured tone I'd used for thousands of lectures. "Lovely winter evening. The King of Sweden presented it personally." Trevor's face flushed crimson above his expensive holiday sweater. "You're lying, prove it." I could feel Emily moving closer through the crowd, her face tight with concern for the spectacle her husband was creating, but I remained focused on Trevor, watching his final gambit crumble like sandcastles before an incoming tide. "Carl 16th Gustav," I continued with quiet precision. "Quite gracious, actually. We discussed Swedish economic policy briefly during the reception." "That's impossible." Trevor's voice cracked slightly, the weight of absolute defeat finally beginning to register. "You're just some old professor from a community college." Henry stepped forward with gentle academic authority. "Actually, Trevor Martin taught at Yale University for 35 years. Quite prestigious, I assure you." The room had gone completely silent now, even the Christmas music seeming to fade into background whispers. Mrs. Henderson touched her husband's arm, a subtle signal about the discomfort of witnessing this family destruction. Sarah from Morrison was watching the entire scene with fascination, her professional interest in human behavior clearly engaged as she observed her colleague's husband's public breakdown. "This can't be happening," Trevor muttered, scrolling frantically through his phone again as if the search results might have magically changed in the past few minutes. I felt a complex mixture of vindication and genuine pity for Thisman, who seemed fundamentally incapable of admitting error. 40 years of teaching had shown me many students who struggled with being wrong, but none had ever fought reality with quite this level of desperate denial. The Nobel Foundation website has photos from the ceremony, I mentioned quietly. If you're interested in verification, Trevor's phone slipped slightly in his trembling hands as he stared at me with something approaching genuine horror. The look of a man whose entire worldview had just collapsed in front of his Christmas guests. Trevor, that's enough. Emily's voice cut through the room like a blade through silk, sharp with authority I hadn't heard from her since she was 16, and defending her younger cousin from neighborhood bullies. She strode across the living room with determined purpose, her holiday dress swishing as she moved between the scattered guests toward the center of our confrontation. Every eye in the room followed her movement. You're embarrassing yourself and everyone here, she continued, her maternal instincts fully engaged despite the target being her own husband. Trevor whirled to face her, his desperation now tinged with betrayal. I won't stand here and listen to this nonsense. This is all some elaborate joke. Stop this immediately. Emily's voice rose to match his volume. You're acting like a child who can't admit he was wrong. The room collectively held its breath. Witnessing marital conflict in public creates a peculiar social discomfort, like watching someone's private diary being read aloud. Fine. Trevor threw his hands up in theatrical defeat. I'm leaving. I won't be humiliated in my own home by some confused old man and fairy tales about prizes. Then go, Emily shot back without hesitation. But stop making this worse for everyone. Trevor stood frozen for a moment, clearly not expecting his wife to call his bluff. The reality of his situation seemed to hit him like cold water. He had nowhere left to retreat except complete physical withdrawal. Mrs. Henderson whispered something to her husband, who nodded gravely. Other guests were beginning to exchange glances that suggested they were calculating their own exit strategies from this family battlefield. Trevor grabbed his coat from the hallway closet with aggressive efficiency, his movements sharp with wounded pride. His car keys jingled as he fumbled them from the side table. This is ridiculous, he muttered, shrugging into his black wool coat. Absolutely ridiculous. Emily followed him toward the front door, her face a mixture of anger and concern. Despite everything, she was still worried about her husband's emotional state. Trevor, please, she said more quietly. Just drive carefully. He paused at the door, hand on the brass knob, and looked back at the assembled guests who were watching his departure with uncomfortable fascination. Merry Christmas, everyone, he said with bitter sarcasm, then stepped out into the December night. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Through the front window, we could see Trevor's BMW backing out of the driveway with more speed than winter safety recommended. Emily stood at the window, watching her husband's tail lights disappear down Laurelhurst Street, her reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. The room remained frozen in uncomfortable silence. Guests uncertain whether this marked the end of the evening or if social customs required them to pretend nothing had happened. I moved quietly to Emily's side and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Well, Emily announced to the room after watching Trevor's tail lights fade into the winter darkness. Dinner is still warm, and I worked too hard on that crown roast to let it go to waste. Her voice carried forced cheerfulness, but I recognized the steel underneath. The same determination that had gotten her through graduate school while working 2 jobs. The guests exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unsure whether staying would be appropriate after witnessing such intimate family drama. Please, Emily continued, turning from the window with a hostess smile that almost masked her emotional turmoil. I'd really appreciate the company. It's Christmas Eve after all. Henry was the first to respond. Of course, my dear. It smells absolutely wonderful. The others gradually followed his lead, social momentum carrying them toward the dining room like leaves following a current. People are remarkably resilient when given permission to return to normally. As we moved toward dinner, I found myself seated next to Violet Green, Emily's neighbor, whom I'd barely noticed during the earlier chaos. She was an attractive woman in her early 60s with silver hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Professor Banks, she said quietly, as Emily carved the turkey, I have to say I'm absolutely fascinated by your career. What an extraordinary evening to learn about your achievements. Please call me Martin, I replied, grateful for her calm tone after the recent upheaval. And thank you. Though tonight's been rather more dramatic than I typically prefer. Violet laughed softly. I imagine so, but you handled it with remarkable grace. The dinner conversation gradually found its natural rhythm as wine glasses were refilled, and the traditional Christmas meal worked its magic on frayed nerves. Guests began asking respectful questions about my research, my time at Yale, even the Nobel ceremony itself. "What was Stockholm like in December?" asked Mrs. Henderson, genuinely curious now that the earlier tension had dissipated. "Beautiful," I replied, surprised by how easily the memories flowed. "Snow everywhere, of course. The ceremony itself is quite formal. Tails and white tie, very European tradition. Did you meet other laureates?" Sarah from Morrison asked. Her earlier fascination with family drama now redirected toward intellectual curiosity. As I shared stories from that remarkable week in Sweden, I noticed Violet listening with particular attention, her eyes bright with interest. "Would you perhaps tell me more over coffee sometime?" she asked during a natural pause in the conversation. "I'd love to hear about your research in more detail." The invitation surprised me, though not unpleasantly. "That sounds delightful, Violet. I'd enjoy that very much." Emily, overhearing from across the table, smiled for the first time since Trevor's departure. "I think that's wonderful, Dad." As the evening wound down and guests began their departures, Violet and I exchanged phone numbers with the awkward politeness of teenagers, though we were both well past retirement age. Thursday afternoon, she suggested, "There's a lovely coffee shop on Hawthorne." "Perfect," I agreed, tucking her number into my jacket pocket. Standing in Emily's doorway as the last guest departed, I reflected on the evening's unexpected turns. I'd arrived expecting awkward family dinner conversation, and instead witnessed the complete vindication of my professional reputation, the collapse of my son-in-law's illusions, and the beginning of what might prove to be an interesting new friendship. "Thank you for tonight," Emily said quietly as we watched Violet's car pull away. "For being you dignified and kind even when Trevor was being impossible." "Family is complicated," I replied, putting my arm around my daughter's shoulders. "But truth has a way of emerging eventually." As I drove home through Portland's holiday-lit streets, I realized this Christmas Eve had given me something I hadn't expected. A reminder that even at 68, new chapters were still possible. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.